Security, remove this imposter from my husband's funeral. Margaret's shrill voice cut through the solemn atmosphere of the funeral home. I stood frozen, still holding the white rose I'd brought to place on Dad's casket. The security guard looked uncomfortable but moved toward me as my stepmother continued her performance. "She's not even his real daughter," my half-sister Amanda Stage whispered to the horrified onlookers. "Just some kid he took pity on before he met Mom." My name is Olivia Parker, and at 35, I was being thrown out of my own father's funeral. The irony wasn't lost on me. The last time I'd seen Dad alive, he'd been trying to tell me something important, something about the past. But Margaret had interrupted before he could finish. The security guard gently took my arm. "Miss, I'm sorry, but I have to ask you to leave." "Wait," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I have a right to be here. He was my father. A DNA test would prove otherwise." That was my half-brother Michael smirking from his seat in the front row. The same smirk he'd worn when he'd accidentally destroyed my science project in high school, knowing Dad would believe his version of events over mine. I looked at Dad's casket, at the portrait of him displayed beside it. His kind eyes seemed to be watching this whole scene unfold, and for a moment I could almost hear his voice. "Stay strong. Live. The truth always comes out in the end." But before I could protest further, 2 security guards were escorting me toward the exit. The sound of snickering followed me out, my siblings enjoying their final victory over the outsider who dared to claim a place in their perfect family. As the doors closed behind me, I sank onto a bench outside the funeral home, my mind spinning back to my earliest memories. Dad, Thomas Parker, had been part of my life for as long as I could remember. He'd married my mom when I was just a baby, and though the marriage hadn't lasted, he'd remained my father in every way that mattered. He'd never missed a birthday, never failed to show up for school events, and had put me through college despite Margaret's protests about wasting money on someone else's kid. My phone buzzed. A text from Amanda. "Hope you enjoyed the show. Dad's real family is saying goodbye now." I was about to turn off my phone when another message came through, this one from an unknown number. "Ms. Parker, this is James Wilson from Wilson & Associates Law Firm. I'm your father's attorney. Please remain nearby. Your presence will be required for the reading of the will immediately following the service." My heart skipped a beat. Margaret had told me there was no will, that everything had been arranged years ago to pass directly to her and her children. But then again, Margaret had told me a lot of things over the years. I sat there for what felt like hours, watching people arrive and leave, many giving me curious or pitying glances. A few old family friends tried to approach me, but quickly scurried away when Margaret's sharp eyes landed on them through the funeral home windows. Finally, the service ended. People began filing out, and I watched Margaret lead my siblings toward their cars, their faces still bearing those self-satisfied expressions. But before they could leave, James Wilson appeared at the entrance. "Mrs. Parker," he called out to Margaret, his voice carrying across the parking lot, "and family, please proceed to my office immediately for the reading of Thomas Parker's will and final letters." Margaret's head snapped around so fast I thought she might get whiplash. "Letters? What letters?" "All will be explained at my office," James replied calmly. Then his eyes found me on the bench. "Ms. Olivia Parker, that includes you." "She's not invited," Margaret snapped. "Any paperwork involving my husband's estate will be handled by his real family." James adjusted his glasses, looking down at Margaret with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Actually, Mrs. Parker, Olivia's presence is explicitly required by your late husband. In fact, he left specific instructions that the will cannot be read without her in attendance." The look on Margaret's face was worth every second of humiliation I'd endured that day. She opened and closed her mouth several times, but no words came out. Amanda and Michael exchanged worried glances. "If you'll all follow me," James continued, "there's something you need to see, particularly an envelope your father left, dated 30 years ago, with explicit instructions that it was to be opened only upon his death, with all of his children present." As I stood to follow them, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the funeral home windows. Behind me, Dad's portrait seemed to be smiling, as if he knew something the rest of us didn't. Maybe he did. Maybe that's what he'd been trying to tell me during our last conversation. Walking toward the lawyer's office, I remembered Dad's words from that day. "Liv, there's something you need to know about the past, about your mother." But Margaret had burst in then, as she always did when Dad tried to have private conversations with me, and the moment was lost. Now, watching Margaret and my siblings march ahead of me, their confidence slightly shaken, I couldn't help but wonder, what was in that 30-year-old letter? And why had Dad waited until after his death to reveal it? The answer would change everything, not just about my past, but about the future Margaret and her children had so carefully planned. They just didn't know it yet. The tension in James Wilson's office was thick enough to cut with a knife. Margaret perched on the edge of her seat like a bird ready to take flight, while Amanda and Michael slouched in their chairs, trying to appear unconcerned but failing miserably. I sat quietly by the window, watching dust motes dance in the afternoon sunlight. James cleared his throat and pulled out a large manila envelope. Before we proceed with the current will, Thomas left explicit instructions to read this letter first. He held up a yellowed envelope, the edges worn with age. It's dated September 15th, 1993. Margaret's face paled. That was around the time she first met Dad, and just after his divorce from my mom. "This is ridiculous," Michael interrupted. "Some ancient letter can't possibly be relevant now." James ignored him and broke the seal. The paper inside was old but well preserved, as if Dad had known how important it would be to protect these words. "My dearest children," James began reading, "if you're hearing this, it means I'm no longer with you. There are truths that need to be spoken, secrets I carry for too long." "Oh, enough of this drama," Margaret cut in. "Just get to the will." James gave her a stern look. "Mrs. Parker, your husband's instructions were very clear. Now, as I was saying," he continued reading, "Olivia, my beautiful daughter, and yes, I mean my daughter in every sense of the word. The truth is, I didn't just marry your mother out of love for her. I married her because you were mine." The room went completely silent. I felt the floor tilt beneath me as the words sank in. "What?" Amanda shrieked. "That's impossible." But James wasn't finished. "I met Sarah, Olivia's mother, years before I publicly knew her. We were young in love, but my family disapproved. When she told me she was pregnant, I was forced to keep my distance. My father threatened to cut off not just me, but to use his influence to destroy Sarah's family business as well. I was a coward. I let her go." Tears were streaming down my face now. All those years of feeling like an outsider, of Margaret's snide comments about my questionable parentage, Dad had known the truth all along. By the time I finally stood up to my father and married Sarah, Olivia was already a year old. We tried to make it work, but the weight of our past secrets and my years of absence had created too wide a gap. When we divorced, I couldn't bring myself to tell the truth. I thought I was protecting everyone. Margaret had gone from pale to red. "This is preposterous. Where's the proof?" James pulled out another document from the envelope. Thomas included DNA test results from 1993, confirming his paternity. He also had updated tests done 6 months ago, which are included in his current will. Michael jumped to his feet. "This can't be legal." "Mom, tell him." But Margaret wasn't looking at Michael. She was staring at me with a mixture of hatred and something else. Fear. "There's more," James continued. "Sarah and I agreed to keep this secret to protect Olivia from my father's interference. But now that both he and Sarah are gone, and with my own death, the truth needs to be known. Olivia isn't just my daughter, she's my firstborn child." The implications of those words hung heavy in the air. In traditional inheritance law, the firstborn often held a special position. This letter also contains my deepest apologies to Olivia for not standing up for the truth sooner, to Amanda and Michael, who must now adjust to a reality different from what they've known, and even to you, Margaret, though I know this revelation will hurt you most of all. "I don't believe any of this," Margaret spat, but her voice trembled. "It's all lies." James set down the letter and picked up a thick file. Along with this letter, Thomas left extensive documentation. Birth records, DNA tests, photographs, letters between himself and Sarah, and a detailed timeline of events. He was very thorough in ensuring the truth couldn't be disputed. I sat there, trying to process everything. Dad wasn't just the man who'd raised me. He was my biological father. All those times Margaret had mocked my unknown origins. She'd been unknowingly insulting her own husband. Now, James said, picking up another document, shall we proceed with the current will? Though I should warn you, Thomas made some significant changes 6 months ago, after confirming the DNA results again. Margaret gripped the arms of her chair, her knuckles white. Amanda had started crying quietly, while Michael just stared blankly ahead. Actually, I spoke up for the first time since entering the office. Could we take a brief break? I think we all need a moment to process this. James nodded sympathetically. Of course. Let's reconvene in 15 minutes. As everyone filed out of the office, I remained in my chair, finally understanding why Dad had tried so hard to talk to me that last time. He wanted to tell me the truth himself, but Margaret's constant interference had prevented it. I pulled out my phone and looked at the last photo I had of Dad and me together, taken at my little cafe 3 months ago. He was smiling proudly as I showed him the new coffee roaster I bought. Even then, he must have known he was sick, must have known his time was running out. I'm so sorry, Dad, I whispered to the photo. I wish you'd told me sooner. But maybe I realized this was his final gift to me, not just the truth about my identity, but the chance to finally stand on equal footing with the family that had tried so hard to push me away. Through the office window, I could see Margaret huddled with Amanda and Michael, their faces tight with worry. Whatever came next, nothing would ever be the same. Dad had made sure of that with one 30-year-old letter. When we met again in James' office, the mood had changed a lot. Margaret, who had seemed so sure of herself before, now looked nervous, playing with her pearl necklace. Amanda and Michael sat quietly, no longer making rude comments. James opened the current will and adjusted his glasses. Now about Thomas Parker's estate and his wishes. What came next felt like a series of shocks, one after the other. To my daughter, Olivia Parker, I leave 50% of my entire estate, including my shares in Parker Industries and my personal investments. Margaret gasped loudly. James kept reading. Also, I leave her my grandfather's house on Maple Street, where she lived with her mother, Sarah, as a child. The house has been fully renovated over the past 6 months. I remembered that house, the big old one with the wraparound porch. Mom and I had lived there with Dad during their short marriage. I always wondered why he kept it. To my children Amanda and Michael Parker, James continued, I leave 25% of the estate each. This will be held in trust until they can show financial responsibility by keeping steady jobs for at least 2 years. What? Michael shouted. That's not fair. James ignored him. To my wife Margaret, I leave our current home and a monthly allowance, which will be managed by the estate trustees. Margaret's face turned red. An allowance? Like I'm a child? James didn't stop. Also, Olivia will get the controlling shares in Parker Industries. The room went wild. Margaret jumped up, Amanda started crying, and Michael yelled about fighting the will. James raised a hand and everyone went quiet. There's a personal letter for each of you, he said, handing out 4 envelopes. Thomas wanted you to read them in private. I took mine with shaking hands and waited until I got home. Sitting in my small apartment above my cafe, I opened the letter. My dearest Olivia, by now, you know the truth about your birth. I wanted to tell you for years but was too afraid. You deserve better from me. I've watched you build your cafe from nothing. You worked twice as hard because I didn't give you the same advantages as your siblings. But you never became bitter. You always stayed kind, even to those who weren't kind to you. You have your mother's strength and my business sense, even if you don't see it yet. I gave you the controlling shares of Parker Industries not just because you're my firstborn, but because you're the only one who truly understands hard work and honesty. I know you'll do the right thing, not just for the company, but for Amanda and Michael too. They need guidance more than they need money. I'm so proud of you, Liv. I hope you can forgive me for not telling you sooner. All my love, Dad. A week later, I sat in what was now my office at Parker Industries, going through old files. It turned out Dad had been preparing me for this all along. Through our talks at my cafe, his interest in how I ran my business, and the advice he gave me. Margaret had already said she was going to contest the will, but James said she didn't have a strong case. Amanda surprised me by apologizing. She said she had always been jealous that Dad was proud of me. Michael was still angry, but he had time to figure things out while he worked to earn his share. As for me, I kept the cafe. It was my first success, and it meant a lot to me. But I also threw myself into learning everything about Parker Industries. Dad was right. I understood more than I realized. The employees remembered me from when I was little. Some told me Dad had talked proudly about how I ran my cafe and even used my ideas in meetings. One afternoon, as I walked past the big portrait of Dad in the lobby, I looked up at his kind eyes. I could almost hear him saying, "See, live. The truth always comes out in the end." I smiled and touched the frame. "Thanks, Dad," I whispered, "for everything." The truth had come out, and with it, I gained not just an inheritance, but something even more important, the knowledge that I truly belonged. That weekend, I visited the house on Maple Street. Standing on the porch, I felt like I had come full circle. I was no longer the outsider. I was the daughter my father had always believed in. Margaret's angry legal letters didn't bother me anymore. I had the truth, Dad's trust, and a future he had carefully prepared for me. Sometimes the best kind of revenge isn't fighting back, it's becoming exactly who you were meant to be.